Good evening, sir. Good evening to all.
Okay, good evening. I see most of us are here. Okay, we'll just be waiting for three more. Now, I have already returned your assignments with my comments and your suggested grades, so I hope you've gotten them and gone over them. All right, okay. I posted a new assignment due for next week in preparation for next week's lecture. Okay, you'll be using the information that you obtained for this assignment on that particular second. That should be your, oh yeah, your second assignment. Okay. Oh no, your third. Your third assignment. Okay. Okay. I have another one. Mr. C. Okay, so this is Mr. C. Anyone else who's waiting? Okay, Mr. Lubang po. Right. Mr. Lubang po. And then I think we would have three more people. Okay. How is the weather in Butuan, Mr. Casyon?
It's partly cloudy, sir, but it's fine naman po. Hindi naman po masyadong maulan.
Well, ngayon lang katatapos ang napakalakas na ulan. So,
Sa Manila po.
well, dito sa amin, sa Marikina. So, I don't know if it's in the rest of Metro Manila, pero lakas ng ulan. So, tahimik na. Akala ko kasi baka yung lakas ng ulan maingayan. Ako dito. Okay. Admit all. Okay, I think we're all here. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven. Okay, so good evening. We'll be going on our next lecture, our next formal lecture. The assignment that you handed in today is in preparation for tonight's lecture. Okay, where you made a survey of different shopping areas, shopping malls, and I also asked you to look at a street with full of stores, shops, and the like. Okay, nearly all of you were able to do that. And I am glad that nearly all of you were still able to go out, even with the restrictions on our movement, given the quarantine. Okay, because your research paper here would require something of that sort of data collection, observation to an actual place, to an actual situation, because this is the work that one does in urban and regional economic analysis. Okay, and nearly all of you now can present illustrative maps, which is very good. In the first assignment, many of you were able to put in tables of data, which is the usual way by which we illustrate our research papers in economics. Okay, but now you can also put in illustrative maps and on-site photos, which is very encouraging. Okay, now as far as uh, the latest assignment is concerned, I also find it encouraging that some of you have begun to take seriously the habit of citing your sources and writing down your list of references. Okay? But half of the papers would have a list of references like bibliography at the end of the paper, which is excellent preparation for when you start writing your research papers. Okay? Your research paper here, the paper that you will need to complete in economic research, and later on, especially for the doctoral students, for when you start writing your thesis. Okay? And when you become a professional economist, you will learn that having papers published is part of our professional activity, and published papers in economics follow a certain format. Okay, and it's worthwhile for you to start learning how to do that format so that it comes out automatically for you. And part of the format there is having list of references and knowing the correct style and formatting of your references and your citations. Okay, so we'll be progressing as we go on. As you know, the grades that you were given were formative. They are supposed to provide instruction. Okay, so the one that will matter insofar as your grade here is concerned will be the examination and the research paper. Okay, so now we will proceed. In the last class, I discussed with you what cities are, cities from a political and from an economic point of view. Now we will be looking at the economic theory of why cities exist. Okay, so we're talking about the existence of cities. There are very many theories as to why cities emerge. And among there are theories from history, anthropology, and the like. Okay? But insofar as economics is concerned, it's important to bear in mind that a characteristic of a developed economy is a very high rate of urbanization. Okay? Developed economies, fully modern societies are dominantly urban. Okay? So that in developed countries, about 80% of the population are urban. Okay? Right now here in the Philippines, mainly, as I discussed in the last class, mainly because of the ambiguity of a definition of a city, if you're going to follow the political definition or the economic or social, the estimate of the rate of urbanization in the Philippines is anywhere from 40 to about 60%. Okay, so if one would like the country to be more developed, it would mean that you'd like the country to become more urban. Okay, so we'll be looking at what would be the economic forces that make cities arise. Okay, so again, let's review what the definition of an urban area is. The general definition being that it's a particularly small area with a very high population density. Okay, there is the political definition here in the Philippines. You have the chartered city, a metropolitan region, then a municipality where the core is the poblacion. Okay? For example, in Butuan, Butuan has a very large land area, okay? Which is why its population density is quite low. However, it's a chartered city, meaning to say it has some independence from the provincial government. And like most municipalities here in the Philippines, there's a particular core which has a high population density, which is called the poblacion. Poblacion in Spanish simply means population. But here in the Philippines, the word poblacion would refer to the old town center where the parish church is and the municipal hall was located. That would be the place for the municipal government as established during the Spanish colonial era. Okay? That's why in Makati, for example, they have a place there called Poblacion, which if you look at it, is actually almost on the periphery of the city. The main city center of Ayala, of Makati is actually in the Ayala Avenue area, Ayala Center area and the like. Well, Poblacion looks like to be very, very much in the periphery, but that used to be the main town center. That was where the parish church is located and where you have the original municipal government. And that was the spot from where the rest of what used to be Makati, the rural barrios and the like, were governed. Okay? For those of you who have not been to Poblacion of Makati, it's a very fascinating place to go to. It has one of the oldest well-preserved churches in Metro Manila. Its parish church dates back to the late 1600s. Okay, their patron saint being Saint Peter and Saint Paul. That church was established by the Jesuits. Actually, Makati, the entire place of Makati, used to be land owned by the Jesuits. Okay? It's just that these Jesuits sometimes could be far too arrogant for their own purposes. So there was a time when they were suppressed. They were expelled from most Catholic countries in Europe and in their colonies, the Philippines being included. So when they were expelled, they therefore lost that property. Later on, that property there will be purchased by the Rojas family. Okay, Don Domingo Rojas, one of whose daughters would marry the first, Jacobo Tobel. Okay? And another would marry the first, Antonio Ayala. And later on, these two would have children, first cousins who married each other. That's why you have the Tobel de Ayala. Although originally, the ones who owned it would be the Rojas family. Okay. So anyway, that's the history of the city of Makati, the unique features of Makati. And again, when you do urban economic analysis, this is one of the things that you keep in mind. You try to look at some of the unique features that happen in a particular place, in a particular city, that gives it its characteristic. Okay? Now, the economic definition of an urban area is that it's a large, highly populated area with a population nucleus and nearby communities integrated in the economic activities. Meaning to say, the people who are in these communities have their residence, place of work, areas for shopping and leisure right there in this entire economic zone or economic region. Okay, consider this map here. And this would be the population patterns of Metro Manila from 1975 to 2010. Okay. 1975, none of you were born. I don't even think your parents have met in 1975. Okay. 1975 was the year I graduated from high school. So if you look at the population distribution in 1975, it is fair to say that the present day NCR, National Capital Region, really is just one single economic zone, economic city, because the population is largely concentrated within the political boundaries of the National Capital Region. Okay, it became NCR around this time, 1975. Okay, there have been proposals since the 1960s that what is nowadays called NCR should be organized into a province so that there'll be a governor, an elected governor and provincial council, so that it becomes the government for the entire city, the economic city of Manila, which has with it the cities of Manila, Quezon City, Makati, Pasay, San Juan, Mandaluyong, and all other towns around it. So the idea, therefore, being that it needs to have its own government responsible for the management of this entire large city. Okay, and it was created as a metropolitan Manila, which became the National Capital Region later, sometime in 1975. Unfortunately, when the Metropolitan Manila was established, the governor that was appointed by then President Ferdinand Marcos was Imelda Marcos. Okay, which was why, with the EDSA revolution, the idea of Metro Manila was regarded as a political tool of the Marcos family, and that's why it was abolished. So you now have just what is called a Metro Manila Development Authority that has no powers, very little power over the individual mayors and city councils of Metro Manila. Okay, it's given some coordinating responsibility, but by itself has no coercive power. Okay, and that's the reason why in a city like Metro Manila, this huge, you can have conflicting policies. Okay, for those of you who drive your car, one such conflicting policy is the fact that there are variations, for example, well, before the pandemic, there are variations in how cities implement their number coding for vehicles. Okay? Some cities like Marikina do not have any. Uh, some allow for a window during which those who are coded on that day can pass through. Some don't have at all any such window and are very, very strict in implementing. Okay? A few years ago, some of you may remember when the mayor of Manila was Joseph Estrada, he decided to ban trucks in the city of Manila in a bid to control traffic in the city of Manila. What happened then was that all these vehicles ended up in the cities around Manila. Okay, so this is the problem when you don't have any political recognition of an economic zone in an economic city. By 1990, you will notice that the population of Metro Manila, the economic zone, has begun to spread out from the boundaries of the National Capital Region. So that by 2010, if you look closely, there are now so many towns and cities around the National Capital Region with high population densities and with lots of those people actually having to regularly enter the NCR and leave daily because they live in, say, Antipolo, Taytay, or Angono, or Tubacoor, or Cabuyao, Hagunoy in Laguna, also in May Kawayan, San Jose, in Bulacan. And these places, although outside the political boundaries of the National Capital Region, are actually integrated in the main city of Metro Manila. Many people who live there on a day, who live there, get inside Metro Manila regularly because they have work in Metro Manila and they might do their shopping in Metro Manila and their children might be going to schools inside NCR and the other way around. There are people who live within NCR but their work would be right outside, like in May Kawayan, in San Jose, in Bulacan, in Antipolo, and the like. Okay, so now, what's the economic explanation for why cities emerge and why they keep on functioning the way they do and why they have certain characteristics? Okay. Now, in cities, whenever you have this concentration of population, it means that in the cities, there's a concentration of jobs and economic activities. Okay? And cities in a particular country end up undertaking a certain degree of specialization. Okay? Cities do have what is known as a comparative advantage. For those of you who have taken up international economics, okay, you know that comparative advantage is the reigning theory that explains why countries engage in trade and why they end up trading in certain commodities. Okay? The idea being that they specialize in the production of certain goods, which they then export. And from these export earnings, they pay for the importation of goods that they need, that they want, but they don't bother to produce because they don't have any specialization in those particular goods. Okay, now this concept is also applicable in the analysis of cities and in their economic functions and the like. Okay? Cities specialize in something, and that's why you have domestic trade, okay? A pattern of movement of goods and of people within a particular country. Okay, so if you have, say, Butuan, Butuan is over in northern Mindanao. It's not too far away from Cagayan de Oro and Hingoog and Surigao. Okay, they have their own types of products and services. Okay, and the products and services that they would specialize in producing are the main sources of income and of livelihood of these particular cities, and they're not necessarily the same. There is specialization. There are certain things that Butuan engages in that Cagayan de Oro does not, but Cagayan de Oro engages in other things. Okay, and in some other ways, there are a lot of leisure activities and amenities and shopping opportunities that are present in Cagayan de Oro, but you don't see them in Iligan, Butuan, Hingoog, Surigao. Okay, so this is the nature of what we're talking here of comparative advantage. And when cities develop their own comparative advantage, the firms locate in their particular areas in various cities, okay? And households then also locate there. Okay? the fact of firms locating in a particular city in close geographic proximity to each other creates what's known as internal scale economies in production. Okay? And when the firms locate together close to each other, and when households also locate close to each other, there is what is called an agglomeration. Okay? Now, on the production side, okay, cities are able to realize their comparative advantage. They're able to engage in, they specialize in the production of certain types of goods and services because this specialization creates efficiencies. Okay? But an important condition for any city to realize its comparative advantage is that it has scale economies in transport, meaning to say it does have substantial transport links with other places. Okay? So that here in Metro Manila in regions 3 and 4, there is substantial transport links, okay, from Metro Manila towards the southern Tagalog provinces of Cavite, Laguna, Batangas. You have the SLEX and the other expressways, and there's similar expressways as well going up north towards Bulacan and Pampanga. But also, NCR has the international airport and the container port. So with that, it allows for huge quantities of goods and services to come in and leave. And it makes it possible for people to come in here and leave as well. Okay? In the same way that the Butuan, Cagayan de Oro, Surigao, they all have ports. There are highways connecting them to each other and to many other towns nearby. They do have airports as well. Okay? So for as long as they have this transport link, okay, the firms located in particular cities can therefore realize their comparative advantage, and they specialize therefore in the production of certain goods, which then they would send to other places courtesy of the transport system. And the transport system also allows these firms to obtain inputs from other areas as well. Okay? Now, a city that has substantial scale economies in transport and would realize its comparative advantage in the production of certain goods and services becomes what is called a market city, meaning to say that it's a place where large numbers of wholesalers and retailers will locate, and that's a place which therefore also attracts a lot of people to do their shopping. Okay? And we're talking here not just of people who live in that city, but also from nearby places, okay, nearby areas. Now, I do not know the situation in Butuan, but the experience of Metro Manila is this. Okay, well, we have to forget for the moment that we're all under quarantine, but one of the characteristics of the Christmas season, apart from hearing Jose Mari Chan singing in malls, is that it's usually from November onwards to December until Christmas Day, where Metro Manila experiences the most intense and the most severe traffic jams. Okay? You have massive traffic jams in the center of Metro Manila, and we're talking here about the main commercial centers. Massive traffic jams going in and out of the Makati, BGC, Ortigas, and the city center of Manila. Okay? It is actually common among all the major cities which belong to Western Christian civilization. Cities that all celebrate Christmas. Massive traffic jams is the experience. Places like London, New York, Paris, and the like. It's because you see, these cities attract shoppers from all around. Okay, those who are in Cavite, Laguna, Batangas, and the like, who could afford to travel, would come to Manila, to Metro Manila, for their Christmas shopping. Because as you all know, Christmas is a time for family feasts and for the purchase and giving of gifts. And Christmas gifts are always goods which are manufactured goods. And a lot of the Christmas food items are also processed or preserved food items like hams, jams, fruitcakes, and the like. And these sorts of commodities are most abundant in the city center. Okay? So that many who come here to shop are people also who live outside. They're from Pampanga, Bulacan, Cavite, Laguna, who shop here. And even some from Visayas and Mindanao who also come to Metro Manila to do their shopping. And the ones who could come here and do their shopping are the ones who could afford to have their own cars. And when they do shop and they bring their cars, what do you have? Massive traffic jams. Okay, and that is just a consequence of the fact that it has good transport links with the rest of the world. Okay, now let's focus on firms, okay, and how firms decide to locate themselves in cities and the like. When firms locate in cities, they can realize what are known as internal scale economies in production. Okay. Economies in economics refer to a decrease in the per unit cost of production. Okay? And the idea here is that when firms locate in cities, they're able to realize scale economies in production. Some of their per unit production costs fall. Okay? One reason being that they would specialize in a certain type of a factor of production, which results in increased productivity. Okay? When you think of a city like Bislig in Surigao del Sur, okay, it, it is located where you have a lot of forests. And the trees there are the sorts of trees which are excellent for the production of pulp and paper. So Bislig emerged as a factory city. It is focused on the plant there that processes the wood products in order to produce pulp and paper. Okay? And here, the factory city would tend to have a large factory because some inputs are indivisible, meaning to say that you need a certain minimum scale of operation to be efficient. And the minimum scale can be very large. That's why it's best that they locate near where they have the particular input source. And in this case, by locating there in Bislig, it's very near the forests where they can easily obtain the wood products for pulping and the production of paper. Okay. So they create what effectively is what's known as a market area, where a market area is the area over which a factory can underprice home production. Okay? So when a factory can underprice home production, they can therefore encourage households to instead just purchase the good from the factory rather than making them at home. Okay? the most common form of market area would be the market area of restaurants and those that provide for food delivery. Okay, so their market area would be that particular geographic area around which the food that they cook and package and deliver can underprice home cooking. Okay, so that becomes their market area. Now, this is the second type of a city, the first one being the market city because of its access to transport and it therefore attracts sellers and buyers to locate there. Then the factory city is a city that emerges because of a particular factory that locates there because of access to a particular specialized input. Now, where a lot of firms locate close to each other, it creates what is known as an agglomeration. Okay, these are the cases where firms locate close to one another, and by doing so, they're able to produce their goods, their output at a lower cost simply by the fact that they locate close to each other. So now you have here an even larger city, one that goes beyond a factory city or a market city, and you now have a large industrial city where several different firms locate there. Okay? Now, what are the main types of agglomeration? Okay? There are two main types of agglomeration. Okay, this is on the production or the firm side. Okay, if I can backtrack a bit and do some review, this agglomeration that I am discussing right now has to do with the agglomeration economies from the point of view of firms, of producers. From the point of view of households, agglomeration is experienced by way of the shopping externality, which is your assignment. And that we will be discussing later. Okay? So when you're trying to make an analysis of the economy of a certain city, of a certain place, it's always worthwhile to look at the analysis from the point of view of both households and firms. Okay? So we're looking here right now at the firms, why firms locate in cities, and it's because they're able to realize agglomeration, which when it comes on the production side. Okay? Now, there are two main types of agglomeration. You have localization economies and urbanization economies. Okay? Localization economies would be the decrease in the production cost of firms in an industry as the total output of the entire industry increases. And the decrease in this production cost is due to these firms in the same industry locating close to each other. So you now have what is called a geographic cluster. Okay? From your microeconomics, okay, you had this so-called internal scale economies of production, which is the decrease in the production cost of a firm because of an increase in the scale of production. Okay? So when one firm increases the scale of production, it experiences a decrease in the per unit cost of production. And that is seen as economies of scale. Now, this is actually what is called internal economies of scale, which means it happens within a particular firm. Now, when you talk of localization economies, this is the case where firms experience a decrease in their per unit cost of production, even though they remain smaller, medium-scale firms, they don't expand. But the size of the entire industry expands, and that's because the firms in that same industry located close to each other and form a cluster. This is called external economies of scale. Okay? So that's localization economies. Now, the other type of agglomeration is what is called urbanization economies. Now, this means that the production cost of a firm, the per unit production cost, decreases as the output of the entire urban area increases. Okay? This means that when there's an increase in the scale of the entire urban economy, it generates benefits for firms located in that particular city. That's the reason, therefore, why a lot of firms want to locate in cities. Some firms cannot locate in cities. We'll be tackling that in another lecture. But for a wide range of firms, okay, for their own growth and expansion, it is best for them to locate in cities. Now let's look at the flow chart that shows the interrelationships among the different factors that result in the expansion of an industry, which would increase income, taxes, spending, and the like. And this is the sort of flow chart that shows to you the interrelationships among the various factors that operate within a regional economy, within an urban economy. Okay? And these are the sorts of flow charts expressing the theoretical relationships among different factors, among different variables. Most analysis of urban economies would have flow charts like this. Flow charts that show to you interconnections and interlinkages among different factors and the like. Okay. For the fans of Dr. Noel de Guzman, okay, in other words, for those who are very, very much into econometrics, these are the sorts of flow charts that are always problematic for econometric modeling. Okay? Because if you look at your ordinary least squares regression, the equation assumes that there is no interacting effects among your independent variables. Whereas in a regional economy, in an urban economy, interacting effects among the variables would be recognized. Okay? And therefore, you have multicollinearity. Okay? So you can do your own research in the Journal of Regional Science and the like, how the more recent econometric models and urban issues using regional data, like how they deal with this problem of multicollinearity using regional data. They've been able to deal with it simply because since 2005, there has been a massive increase in computing capacity. So now there would be more research papers using econometric methods in regional analysis. But this is just an introduction to the theoretical apparatus in regional analysis and the implications for econometric modeling. Okay, so now let's proceed. So let's look first at localization economies. Okay? When firms locate close to each other, they experience external economies of scale, which means that the firms may remain small or medium scale, but the entire industry increases and expands, resulting in a decrease in per unit production cost for all the firms in the industry, for as long as the firms located close to each other. Okay? And there are three reasons why this decrease in production cost is realized. You have scale economies in intermediate inputs, there's labor market pooling, and there's knowledge spillover. Okay. Now, first you have scale economies in intermediate inputs. When the firms in a particular industry locate close to each other, what will happen is that the suppliers of their inputs now know where they are located, so the suppliers of their inputs will now locate there. Okay, and by being geographically clustered, okay, the firms therefore can obtain the inputs that they require far more easily. Okay, one firm's input demand may not be large enough to exploit the economies of scale in production of intermediate input. But when several firms of the same industry locate close to each other, their total input demand will be so huge that the producers of their specialized inputs would end up locating there. And these firms now have access to these inputs at lower cost and of even higher quality. Okay. And this is especially the case when the input is bulky, fragile, and needs quick delivery, and therefore could have relatively high transport cost. Okay. Now, the classic example of localization economies is the fashion industry in Manhattan. This was one of the earliest papers in urban economic analysis that studied the industries located in cities, looking at their internal structure and the like. And that's when they discovered these concepts of localization economies. So the original example was the fashion industry that's located in Manhattan, the main central district, which the Americans call borough, in the city of New York. Okay. Incidentally, ladies and gentlemen, cities in Western Christian civilization have more women than men. Okay, even when the national gender distribution is considered balanced. Balanced means that, okay, gender distribution is usually expressed as 100 males for every 100 females. For as long as the ratio veers from about 98 to 107, okay, then there is what is called gender balance. Right now here in the Philippines, our national gender ratio is about 105 males to 100 females. Okay. And one of the reasons for the higher number of males is that females have longer life expectancy. And for a still unexplained reason, there's a much higher rate of male infant mortality. So a lot more men would be born, but not as many as the women will reach their teenage years. Okay? And at old age, there'll be more females than males. So nationally, there is a gender balance here in the Philippines. That's not something that one can say for India or China, which for the past 30 years, China promoted a one-child policy. India encouraged contraception and abortion. Both China and India did that. The result is that these countries are cultures that have always preferred sons to daughters. So now their gender ratio is about 132 to 127 males for 100 females. So they have gender imbalance. Now here in the case of the Philippines, nationally there's a gender balance, but in any city in the Western Christian world, there are more females than males in cities. Okay? That's because the sorts of jobs available in cities are the sorts of jobs that females prefer and the sorts of jobs that prefer to hire women. And these are largely service sector jobs. On the other hand, in the rural areas, a lot of the jobs there prefer to hire men. And those are the sorts of jobs that men would like to work at, such as agriculture, forestry, fishery, mining, quarrying, and the like. Okay, so there'll be more males than females in rural areas. Okay, kaya ganun na nangyari sa Brokeback Mountain kasi wala namang babae doon. Okay, panay tupa, walang puta. Okay, now that's also the reason why from Hollywood, chick flicks are always set in cities. Okay? Cities are always the setting for female stories. Okay? If you have guy flicks would be located in outer space, or it would involve their moving across the sea or across mountains, rivers, or if they're in cities, they would smash and destroy cities and the like. So those are guy flicks. So that just represents for you the demographic characteristic of cities and the like. Now let's look at this example, the Manhattan fashion industry. This sort of example, you can watch this. I'm encouraging you to watch films since after all we're on Paran. One of the finest examples here of a chick flick that uses a good deal of economic theorizing as well is the film The Devil Wears Prada. Okay, if you notice, okay, the Devil Wears Prada is set in a fashion industry in New York City. New York City, the fashion industry has a well-defined location. In fact, that place is called the Fashion District. That it's informal term. And in tourist brochures, they call it the Fashion District. And there's even an avenue there that has a second name. Sixth Avenue is known as Fashion Avenue. All the major industries that are related to fashion locate there. Okay? So in the case of the Devil Wears Prada, they are in the publishing side of the fashion industry. And the fashion designers are located there close to each other. So much so that if you recall, they just walk from the publishing office to the studios of the fashion designers and the like. Or if ever, they could just take a short taxi cab ride. Okay. Now, when all these firms locate in the fashion industry located close to each other, the producers of buttons, zippers, fabric, sequins, and all other items which are needed in making clothing located there as well. So that made it possible for all these fashion establishments to easily obtain their inputs. Okay? And they can even get the suppliers of the buttons, for example, at short notice, they can show the design of a button and ask them if they can produce these buttons, large quantities of these buttons in a short period of time. And that is possible because the button manufacturers have their offices located very close there. So now there's access, easy access to the specialized inputs that they require. Okay. And also, you have the location there of those who produce accessories. So there are also those who produce footwear. They've located there. And notice that a large market in footwear would be men's athletic shoes. Okay. So many of the producers of footwear, both for women and for men, especially the athletic shoes and the like, locate there, and so would the suppliers of their inputs, the the producers of shoelaces, designers of shoelaces, those that make the material for the rubber soles and the like, they've all located there, very close over there. So in this way, they're able to access specialized inputs at a much lower cost. Okay? Now, corporate headquarters and business services also tend to cluster. And here in Metro Manila, they tended to cluster in the Ayala Center, BGC, and Ortigas. Headquarters of various corporations are located there. And by locating there, then other companies providing business services located there too. So you have law offices, accounting offices, advertising offices, and the like. All these other firms that provide specialized inputs for these firms, okay? Then in Silicon Valley, many high-tech firms and the manufacturers of non-standard electronic parts have located there. And by locating there again, those that manufacture their specialized inputs also located close to that particular area. So it's not just the computer software firms that one finds in Silicon Valley. One can also find there the designers and producers of computer chips, computer parts, and the like. Okay? Now, in Metro Manila, one industry that has clustered would be the university belt. Some of you may have finished your studies at UST and other universities in that area. If you notice that over there are many establishments that cater to the requirements of faculty, students, and university employees working anywhere in that area. There always are a lot of student dormitories. There are many affordable rental apartments. You have a lot of stores dealing with uniforms, school supplies, and the like, and a lot of restaurants that provide very inexpensive meals for students, okay? Walang masyadong fine dining. Fine dining, makikita mo na yun sa pupunta ka na sa Makati or Robinson's Magnolia. But there, in the university belt, the eating places there are tailored for the people who are there, students mainly. And as for the faculty and the staff of universities, they generally do not belong to the higher income category. That's why a lot of eating places, shops, and the like tend to provide very affordable items and services. Okay. Now, the second cause for localization economies is labor market pooling. Okay. When the firms have geographically located close to each other and formed a cluster, those people who would like to work there, therefore nowhere to go. Okay? They can go there and get a job. So effectively, for these industries that form the cluster, they attract the laborers that they want. Okay? Those laborers with skills specialized for their particular industry would go there. So with this labor pool, they can access the laborers that they want and they can hire them at not too high salary scales because there's so very many of them who congregated there. Okay, and at the same time, um, from the point of view of the working person or the laborer, it's always worthwhile to go there and get a job there if he or she really wants to work in that particular industry. Because by being employed there, he or she becomes part of an information network. So they can start hearing job opportunities elsewhere. So much as firms can have access to the specialized labor skills that they do require, the laborers can also obtain information about the jobs that are available in the industry that they want to work in. So you can have this improved labor matching, okay, with firms able to obtain the sort of skills that they want and that they need, and laborers able to land the jobs that they really want to be involved in. So it would therefore encourage higher productivity among laborers, and higher productivity redounds to higher profitability for the firms that hire them. Okay. Now, how is information spread? Of course, nowadays, information is easily spread by way of the internet. But before the quarantine, people who work in that particular area, like if you go to Makati BGC, they would meet each other in clubs, job placement agencies, restaurants, coffee shops, and other public areas, meeting people there in the same industry, and they'll end up exchanging information. Okay. And then the third reason for localization economies is what's known as knowledge spillover. Okay. This would be the case that a cluster allows for rapid exchange of information and diffusion of technology. Now, this one now happens among the executives of the firm. Where labor market pooling happens among employees, among the laborers, knowledge spillover occurs among the executives of the firm. They usually would meet in particular clubs, restaurants, coffee shops, and the like, and there they'll be exchanging ideas. And it's very, very much the case that sometimes you can encounter information that might not be worthwhile for you, but it could be worthwhile for another person who happens to be in your industry. For example, um, those who are engaged in the manufacture of athletic shoes might encounter information about shoe manufacture that might not be useful for those that produce athletic shoes, but could be worthwhile for those who produce lady shoes or men's leather shoes. And they could meet in these clubs and pass on the information. Okay, so much as there is competition, there's also a good deal of cooperation because firms are never really perfectly competitive. Okay, they produce imperfect substitutes. So much as there's competition, there is also exchange of information and the like. Okay? And when one talks of knowledge spillover, there's a certain what's called a product cycle theory of location. Okay. When you have small firms that locate in clusters, they might develop new products, like for example, the original fashion design establishments locating there, designing different types of clothing, fabric, shoes, and the like. Once a certain product is successful, then the design becomes standardized and can now be produced on a large scale. The production now actually moves to a site out far away, okay? Usually outside the city center, and they are located where there is lower cost of labor and lower cost of land. But the designers and decision makers still locate themselves over there in the cluster. Okay? So that's localization economies, sorry. Now let's look at urbanization economies. Now this happens when firms may not necessarily be in a cluster, but they still locate in cities. Okay. Now they can still realize economies of scale, internal economies of scale, through the process known as urbanization. When the production cost of the firm decreases as the output of the entire urban area increases. Okay. The increase in the scale of the entire urban economy generates benefits for firms throughout the city. Now, what is the explanation for that? It is still the same as for localization economies. Okay? Though the firms may not necessarily be clustered in the same area in the industry, still, in cities, it's easier for them to tap into those that produce their intermediate inputs, okay, and realize their economies of scale. And again, by locating in cities, the laborers know where to go in search of jobs in the particular industry that they're looking for. Okay? And because they are in the city, the transport distances among the different firms in the industry are not necessarily as wide as compared to when they happen to be located in many different cities throughout the country. Okay? And the executives here can also much more easily meet and realize knowledge spillover. Executives are the type who have their own vehicles and they can easily move around and meet in clubs and restaurants, which may be a bit of a distance from their offices. Okay? But this exchange of information still happens and is more easily realized when they all happen to be located in a particular city. That's the reason why some cities end up increasing and increasing in size faster than everybody else because of urbanization economies. Okay? Now, telecommunications infrastructure has expanded a lot in the past couple of years. Okay? And our own experience with the pandemic has shown the possibilities and limits of telecommunication technology. Okay. Now, cities promote clustering and the concentration of firms and households promote proximity and face-to-face contacts. And that's why for those who want to become professionals, especially high income professionals, which is why all of you are taking up graduate degrees in economics to realize the high income provided people with substantial human capital. Apart from your knowledge of your subject matter, there's also, of course, the importance of people skills because there are very, very many people in the city. Population density is high, you have crowds, we have to learn how to deal with people. Okay, it's said that telecommunications might replace face-to-face contact when in fact what has happened in the past 20 years where telecommunications have vastly improved and become more creative and imaginative, it actually has made it telecommunication complementary with actual face-to-face contacts. A lot of people have been meeting online since the pandemic, but it therefore created a wider and wider range of contacts. But everybody is still planning on actually meeting each other face-to-face later on. Okay? Which is also the nature of relationships before. When you live and work in cities, then you could have a lot more face-to-face contacts. Okay, some telecommunication systems can replace certain types of face-to-face contacts, such as purchases of goods and services and the like, but they've also increased the network of relations and the complexity of interactions. Okay, so because of telecommunications networking, it's now possible to meet so many people, have lots of business dealings with them long before you actually meet each other face to face. And at some point in time, people would still want to meet each other face to face. All right. So that is agglomeration on the part of firms. On the part of households, the agglomeration that households that locate in cities experience would be in the form of what is known as a shopping externality. Okay. The shopping externality is the argument that the sales of a store are affected by the location of other stores. Okay. So if it's a standalone store, okay, its sales would not be affected by any establishment whatsoever. On the other hand, when a store is located close to other stores, okay, their sales will be affected by the nature of the other stores nearby. Okay, so for example, a drugstore locating near a grocery, near a restaurant, these three establishments would increase a much faster increase of sales simply because they located close to each other. Because it makes the shopping experience for many consumers much more complete. Okay, so that those who would like to do their grocery could end up also purchasing some items from the drugstore, and at the same time having a place to eat for them to also rest and relax from their shopping. Okay. Stores, therefore, locate in retail clusters. Retail clusters would be, in your assignment, streets where lots of stores have located themselves. Okay? And some go as far as locating themselves in shopping centers and in malls. Okay? So you therefore now have what are known as market cities. Okay? Now, shopping externality is realized when the establishments are actually imperfect substitutes, meaning to say they're similar but not identical, or if they're complementary goods. When you're talking about imperfect substitutes, when you're talking about eating places, oh, there are many different kinds. They're not really imperfect substitutes. I mean, they're not exactly perfect substitutes, they're imperfect substitutes. But it therefore increases the range of choices. That's why some of you mentioned yung food court, ang daming iba't ibang tipo ng mga pagkain doon na mabibili. You see, if in a food court, they all are selling the same type of food, it's not going to attract a lot of people because at some point in time, you've already eaten the same kind of food. On the other hand, if they're imperfect substitutes, it attracts people to keep on going there to try the different types of food available. So you have much greater enriching shopping experience and at the same time greater revenues for all those various eating places there. Okay? In the same way, you have stores that locate close to each other selling different types of clothing. Okay? So that's one way by shopping externality is realized. When firms which are imperfect substitutes locate close to each other. Kaya nandyan ang Jollibee, McDonald's, KFC, then you have Mang Inasal, Chowking, okay? They're imperfect substitutes, but they all locate close to each other. Okay? And for a shopper, knowing where they all are, okay, greatly enhances your own shopping experience because then you could eat at Jollibee. Next time you might want to try Chowking. Next time you might want to try another place. But what happens is knowing that there are lots of these choices available means that a lot of shoppers will continue to return to that particular place. Then the other type of shopping externality would be the case where you have stores that sell complementary goods. Okay, so you have stores that sell clothing. Then footwear stores will locate nearby. There are also those stores that sell bags, and also those stores that would sell other types of fashion accessories like jewelry store, watch stores, and the like. And always an eating or a drinking place because shoppers at some point in time would need to rest and would need to recharge and would need something to drink or to eat to renew themselves. Okay. Now, given the rise of online shopping and especially their regularity nowadays because of the quarantine, it will be interesting to see once quarantine is lifted and we hope to God it can be lifted by the Christmas season, but we don't know yet. We keep on hoping. We will see to what degree has online shopping been able to replace these regular physical face-to-face shopping. Right? Now, I asked you to analyze the location situation in various malls. Okay, here's one example of a mall, large one, over in the United States of America. Okay, and many of you did the same analysis. One thing that most of you noticed is that, for example, here, You have on the leftmost side, there's Debenhams, a well-known department store based in the United Kingdom. I think they opened an outlet in Makati, but I don't know if they're still there. Sorry, if they're still there. Then there's John Lewis, another UK-based retailer of clothing. And in the center, there's Selfridges. Selfridges would be a high-end department store in the United Kingdom. Okay. In any mall, these are what are known as flagship stores, meaning to say these stores are well established, they have a brand, they sell a wide range of items, therefore they attract shoppers. And being the flagship store, they're the ones that can attract shoppers, and therefore a lot of other establishments can then locate close by in order to take advantage of the presence of the shoppers that go to these establishments. Food stores, sellers of other clothing and footwear, electronic items, and the like. Okay? And they locate themselves close to what is called a mall. Just as a final point, just for your own chismis and yabang purposes, okay? The word mall, okay, is an Americanization of a British term. Okay? The term in the United Kingdom is actually the mall. They pronounce it the mall, M-A-L-L, the mall. Okay? The most famous mall is that wide boulevard in front of Buckingham Palace. It's called the Mall, and that particular road is the main avenue for ceremonies, okay? Like the carriage procession of the royal family, parades, and the like. Malls were actually a broad avenue that first emerged in the late 1700s in London and then later on copied in other cities in the United Kingdom. And in this broad open space, okay, wealthy people established their residences. And in the United Kingdom, okay, uh, a large residence in the city was called the townhouse because your large residence in the province is called the country house. Kaya pag yung mga mayayaman, they would have a country house like Downton Abbey. That's their own palace there in their probinsya. But in the city, they would have their own mansion, which they would call the townhouse. Okay? Now, many of these townhouses located near what was called a mall. They call it a mall because the wealthy people at the time developed uh, a liking for a certain ball game known as Pall Mall. Okay? Pall Mall involves the hitting of a ball with a particular contraption. You hit it where the ball rolls from one particular hole to another hole. Okay. And the winner is the first one that's able to go around. So the mall, therefore, was an open space meant to be engaged in by people of a game that takes up a lot of space, which is the nature of high income consumption. High income consumption is also wasteful of resources. So this Pall Mall required a huge space, much like golf nowadays. Okay, a high income sport that requires a huge space, green space. Okay. Now, by the mid 1800s, Pall Mall was no longer a very popular game. Okay, but the place where the game used to be played was still called the Mall. Okay? So, since these malls were located in the city center, where you have high-income people were living, in time, gradually, many of the high-income people began to sell There are townhouses. And then you have more and more high-end stores locating there. So now the word mall, therefore, became a street that would be associated with stores. Okay? And in the United Kingdom, there are very many streets there, which is just like the streets in Manila and in the streets that you're assigned to go to, where all the different stores locate. That's the original mall. Okay? So when American shopping center developers had a look at this, they decided to Americanize the term. They decided to pronounce it their way, so they called it the mall. Then they created the mall as an establishment where you have lots of stores operating in an enclosed space. Okay? Now, here in the Philippines and here in Southeast Asia, one of the reasons for the popularity of the malls is that malls are generally air conditioned, so they are far more refreshing to enter compared to the heat and humidity of the outdoors. In contrast, in the older cities in Europe, okay, the streets, the shopping areas, the older malls, okay, still have their stores along the streets there. And because it's generally cold throughout much of the year, it's actually quite refreshing to be out there in the outdoors. So that's why modern malls, as we know it, only emerged in the suburbs in the cities in Europe. They're located there, not in the city centers. Okay? Right. So I will end here. Yep. It's nearly 7:30. If there are any questions, our next subject for next week would now focus on what's called location decisions, okay, which is the location decisions of firms and households. Okay, what enters into location decisions of firms and households such that they actually end up being in cities. Okay, any questions so far? None? Okay. So I'll say good evening and I'll see you next week. It's nearly 7:30, time for dinner, and I will not answer email messages until tomorrow at 8 a.m., just like I promised. All right. Okay. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, sir.
I'll see you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Wait.
sir.
Thank you,
I mean,
sir.
there's
Thank
chat.
you,
There's
sir.
a chat. Someone is sending. Oh, you just said thank you. My pleasure. Okay. I'll see you next week. Good night.
Thank you, sir.
Good night, sir.
Bye
Thanks, sir.
bye. Okay. I'll end it now. Bye bye.